Okay, so today we're going to be solving multi-step equations. Focus is going to be on distribution with a negative that has no coefficient. So what we want to do is begin these problems the same way each time. We always want to draw the wall down the equal side to separate the left side from the right side. So what we should do before we begin is scan the problem and see if we can fill in any of our safety coefficients, if there's no coefficients there, which in this case we can. There's also a negative out front by itself. Now, again, just like you fill in a safety coefficient of 1 in front of your variable x, you can do the same thing here. Okay, now when we know that when a number is touching parentheses, that means distribution. We're going to multiply using distribution. And remember to use your triangle if you're someone who struggles with multiplying and dividing positive and negative integers. So here we have negative 1 times negative 1. If we cover them up, we get a positive 1x. Negative 1 times negative 3. Remembering you have to distribute the negative 1 to both numbers in the parentheses. Negative times a negative is again a positive 3 equals. Now on the right side we can see we have the same situation. We have a number touching parentheses, which again, that implies multiplication using the distributive property. So here we have negative 4 times 1x, which is a negative 4x. And we have negative 4 times a positive 3 again. Use the triangle. A negative times a positive is a negative. 4 times 3 is 12. So now we're going to solve this like any other equation question. We always begin by moving the variables over first, specifically the smaller variable. In this case, we have a positive 1x and a negative 4x. The smaller one is a negative 4x. So what we're going to do is, again, to cross the barrier to the other side, to move this negative 4x over, we need to perform the inverse, or the opposite, which is a positive 4x. And what you do to one side, you must also do to the other side to keep the equation balanced, like a balance beam. Opposites or inverses always cancel, so those will cancel. When we combine our like terms, we get 5x, bring down our plus 3, our equals, and you must be very careful here. You must bring down, it's a negative 12, not just 12. Now remember, the goal here is to get x by itself. We can see that 3 is in the way. In order to get 3 away from the variable x, we again want to move to the other side of the equal sign, and we can do that by performing the opposite. And what we do to one side, we must do the same thing to the other to keep the equation balanced. And remember, opposites or inverses always cancel. So now we have 5x remaining equals, now we have an integer question here. So we look at the signs. Do we have the same sign or different sign? In this case, the signs are the same, so the rule tells us that we can add the two numbers, we get 15, and we keep the sign. We add and we keep. The last step with equations is always to get rid of the coefficient in front of the variable x, and we do this every time by dividing by that coefficient. So here we're going to divide both sides to keep the equation balanced by that coefficient of 5, and we're going to be left with x equals, and again you have a negative divided by a positive 5, so we go to the triangle, negative divided by a positive, we cover them up, and we're left with a negative 3. Okay? Looking at the second example now. This one's very tricky, so be very careful with this. Again, you could always pause the video at any time if you want to try this on your own. Okay? So here, we are going to begin this question just like all the others, and we're going to draw a wall down the middle of our equal sign. Now here we must begin by scanning the problem and seeing if I can fill in any safety coefficients where there are none. So here, I can put a 1 here, and remember, there is a negative sign here with touching the parentheses. There's no number, so I can fill in a 1 here. Now, I know it might be tempting to go ahead and do this. 3 plus 2 minus 1 is 4, but remember this negative 1 is actually attached to this parenthesis, which means to multiply through distribution. You can, however, eventually combine these, which we will do, but not yet. Remember, if you struggle with multiplying positive and negative integers, use the triangle. Here we have a negative times a negative, which when we cover them up becomes a positive 1x. And then we have a negative times a positive. When we cover those up, we end up with a negative, and then 1 times 1 is 1. And we can combine the 3 and the 2 as discussed earlier and get 5. Now we're going to bring everything else down. Okay, so now what we can do is combine any like terms that we have. Let's focus on the left side here. I have the 5, the 1x, and the negative 1. Here I can see I can combine just the integers. Those are like terms, the 5 and the negative 1. And I'm going to get 4, which is a positive. I'm going to bring down my 1x, bring down my equal sign, and remaining on the right, which we haven't even touched yet. So now what we can do is solve this just like any other equation question by remembering to get all of the variables, the x's, on one side of the equal sign and all of the integers or the numbers on the other or opposite side of that. So we begin by doing this each time. We always look at the variables and see which one's smaller. In this case, the 1x is smaller, so I'm going to move that to the right. And we can do that by performing the inverse. Remember, to cross this barrier, it's like a toll. You need to pay the toll by doing the opposite in this case. And if you subtract 1x from this side, you must also subtract 1x from the right side to keep the equation balanced. Opposites or inverses always cancel. All we're left with on the left is 4 equals, and then we have 2x minus 6. Now again, traditionally, we like to see our x term on the left. So using a property that we learned about in 7th grade, we can actually switch the sides here using the commutative property of equality. Okay, so all we did was just like you're on the computer, you're clicking copy and paste. You're copying this right side and pasting it, making it on the left. Being very careful when you rewrite it that you don't make a mistake. So now our goal, remember, is to get x by itself. The only thing in the way on the left is the negative 6. So to move that across to the other side, we make it a positive 6. Remember, what we do to one side, we have to do to the other. So now what's remaining is 2x equals 10 when we add the right. And then the last step always is going to be to divide both sides by your coefficient, meaning the number in front of the x. Remember, when you divide, as mentioned in earlier videos, you do not change the sign. You always divide by that exact coefficient. And then we get 10 divided by 2 is going to give us 5.